So feedback for component 1 fitness and body systems exam, the 1 hour 45 full paper, worth up to 90 marks. So just a quick recap, making sure that you fill out the page correctly. So we've got your surname, centre number, candidate number, and again you're allowed a calculator with this exam. Remembering to use black ink or a ballpoint pen, including fill in all the boxes at the top of the page with your name. Answer all the questions, answer the questions in the space provided. You can have additional paper if need so, but please make sure you attach the question number to that paper. So just a quick recap then, when we get to the multiple choice, you need to make sure that you cross the box fully. If you've made a mistake, as shown here, you can put a line through the cross. If you've really made a mistake, cross the whole thing out and put a cross next to the correct answer. So let's start with 1A. Which of the following is the correct classification for bone in the carpals? So we're thinking of bone in the carpals, they're in your hand, and that should give you an indication to the question. Okay, so 1 being the clue to the question, classification of bone, and carpals telling us the right area. So we know it can't be the long bone, and there are irregular bones in the hand, but definitely not in the carpals or the tarsals, which are your feet and finger bones. So we're pretty much left with flat and short. And what we should recognise with carpals and tarpals in our feet are that they are short bones. They're the tiny bones in our hands that help make up our fingers. Okay, moving on to the next question. Which one of the following is an example of an involuntary muscle? Now this is a tough question, and the exam board have put a few answers here that will make it difficult to respond to. So you've got the answer of muscle in the wall of the heart, muscle in the upper arm, muscle in the wall of a blood vessel, and muscle in the lower leg. So the correct answer the exam board are looking for are muscle in the wall of the blood vessel. Okay, so it's the wall in the blood vessel that contracts, vasoconstricts and constricts, that enable blood to be pumped around to the relevant parts of the body. Again, a trick question when we're looking at the wall of the heart. So the muscle in the wall of the heart, not the muscle of the heart, the cardiac muscle. Okay, moving on to figure 1 for C, showing a cross-section of the heart. It's asking you to identify the right atrium. So the first thing you've got to do with A, B, C, D is to identify which side's right and which side's left. And when you've done that, you've got an upper box and a lower box. So you've got 50-50 chance as a guess. So looking at the atrium, the correct answer really is the top part of the heart. The correct answer is B, looking at the right atrium here. Remember, it's a reversal of the heart. It's a cross section, so it's cut the heart in half. That's what you can see inside, and it's obviously reversed to what would be inside your body. Moving on to the graph question, surprisingly a number of people get this one wrong, and again when we're looking at graph questions, not many people edit the graph and break down what it says. So Luke recorded his heart rate as part of his physical exercise programme. Figure 2 shows Luke's heart rate graph for the first 4 weeks of his PEP. So obviously we've got resting heart rate working, recovery 1, 2 and 3, a bit like what you guys looked at for your PEP. Resting heart rate is the key to this question. If you look at all the resting heart rates, he's obviously started with a relatively high resting heart rate in the mid-80s, and by the time he's finished his sessions, he's in the 60s or at least high 70s. So using question D then, which one of the heart graphs in figure 2 is most likely to represent Luke's heart rate during his first training session? Now, a number of you got obsessed with the working section here, and some even looked at the recovery, and that's why the responses were wrong. But the only true indication of fitness over time would be looking at his resting heart rate. Working heart rate can go up or can stay high if you're unfit and you had to work really hard in the first session, or it can stay low in the first session because you're not working hard and build up and up as you're working. So you can't tell which way around it is just from the graph alone. You can with resting because you can see a gradual decline from a high resting heart rate to low, which means which one of the heart rates is best shown looking at the key figure here. The one circled has got the highest resting heart rate. We follow that one down, and that only gives us the answer of A. Final few multiple choice questions then. So which one of the following is a definition of health? So whenever we think of health, we think of PES, personal, physical, emotional and social. When you look through here, you've got some other key definitions that will help you out potentially in the later part of the exam. So it's key to maybe label as you go through. So the first definition is clearly optimum weight. The second one is talking about the choices, so lifestyle factors. Third one, the ability to meet the demands of the environment, which is fitness, which means D, a complete state of emotional, physical and social well-being and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. This is a definition we've hammered for a number of weeks now, so the expectation here for everybody to get that one right. The key part of knowing definitions, you're just giving away marks if you don't. Moving on to the next question then, F. Which one of the following tests would be used to measure performance cardiovascular endurance? A load of you got confused here with the test, and there's stuff that we've done this year to be able to use the test correctly for your PEP. So the 1 minute sit-up test measures muscular endurance. It's your muscles going up and down for a minute. We then look at the 1 minute press-up test. Again, it's your muscular endurance. Anything for a minute or less isn't really going to be affecting your cardiovascular system. The Harvard step test, on and off a bench or a step for a continuous period of 5 minutes and more. That, for me, sticks out as your cardiovascular endurance test. The 30-metre sprint, as we all know, just sheerly for a few seconds tests your speed, which means C is the only obvious response to F. Let's have a look at G then. Which one of the following states the reasons for the use of a PAR-Q? And the first thing is most people don't remember what the PAR-Q stands for. Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. So it's looking at whether you're ready or not to attempt physical activity. And that's reducing the acronym down to the correct terminology. The first line fits perfectly with the information we've just covered, to assess personal readiness for exercise. So again, by knowing what PAR-Q actually stands for, it helps you answer this question. To determine the training requirements of a sport, it doesn't do that. It doesn't really cover much about sport. It just looks at the person and their fitness levels. To gain consent of the performer to participate in training, a PAR-Q doesn't need a signature and it doesn't need your consent. To assess the skill level performer, again, nothing to do with skill or sport, only looks at whether you're ready or not to attempt activity. So it means A is the only obvious answer here. And finally, our last multiple choice question. Which of the following is a soft tissue injury? So we think of concussion, it's when our brain has shaken against our skull. So it's our bone injury. Tennis elbow, so the overuse of our arm in a repetitive action, like when we play tennis, is a soft tissue injury. A fracture is a bone injury and a dislocation is a bone injury. So that, again, only leaves us with one potential answer, which is B. Okay, I think only one person got this question correct out of everybody. And it is a tricky question. I completely understand the reason why everybody went for the alveoli, because that's the place where most gaseous exchange takes place. But what you didn't do is actually use the figure. You're so used to just ignoring the figures and answering what you know. The question says, figure 3 shows the movement of gases in and out of a capillary. Using figure 3, state where this gas exchange, not where gaseous exchange takes place, where this gas exchange is taking place. Now have a quick look at the picture. You've got carbon dioxide going into the capillary and oxygen leaving the capillary. That doesn't happen in your lungs. In fact, it's the reverse, where you have oxygen cells being taken into the capillary while you remove carbon dioxide. So the only other place in the body that this can correctly occur in, and the only answer that was acceptable, is something like at the muscle. So during exercise, your body is taking oxygen into your muscle from your capillary and getting rid of the carbon dioxide as a byproduct into the capillary to be sent up back to the heart, to the lungs, to be pumped out and to be breathed out of the body. State 2 reasons why gas exchange is important in a long-term tennis match. Now, again, the sporting example is important here. It's only worth 2 marks. So again, you don't have to explain, there's no connectives needed here, but you do need to refer to the fact about the long tennis match. So the first quick, easy response is you need oxygen for energy production to sustain long rallies. So sometimes a rally can last for multiple minutes, sometimes 6 or 7 minutes for a really long rally. So you need energy for that from the oxygen to be able to sustain that energy required for that long period. The second one is reverse to that. So rather than needing oxygen, you need to actually remove the additional carbon dioxide. Now your body always is removing carbon dioxide and is always providing you with energy. So you have to be really specific here. If you didn't put additional, you wouldn't get the extra mark. So it's the need to remove of the additional, the extra byproducts being produced in your muscles of the carbon dioxide generated through playing tennis, so it can be breathed out. Again, we've applied it back to the example requested. For 2 marks on a state 2, it's an easy response. You don't need to write in full sentences that connect to both points. You can simply do as I've done. Number 1, that's the first reason, and number 2. Okay, so question 3, again another figure. Every time there's a picture or a graph or some information in a figure, the exam board have put that there at a cost to themselves for you to use. So again, this picture must be something you refer to. Some of you didn't even realise it's a female player, so it's an England and Ireland, by the looks of it, rugby game being played. So, question 3a, examine, so look at 2 ways the skeletal system makes it possible for the rugby player to move into the position shown to pass the ball. So she's moved into the position, she potentially is a number 9, she's got down nice and low and bending her knees, picked up the ball ready to release it, potentially from the back of a ruck. So in order to get the marks, this is worth a whopping 6 marks, and again, most people didn't get it, and because it's got examine and it's only looking for 2 marks, we've got to explain both of the 2 ways we want to look at. So the first response we've got is, to achieve the position shown related to the question, she needs to flex her knees. Okay, if she was straightening her knees, obviously we'd look at extending. Which is a key word. I've shown a connective there, which is possible due to the hinge joint, so the joint in her knee, allowing the player to get in the crouched position due to the arrangements of bones at the joint. So there's 3 key bits there. We've got the which, the hinge joint, the flex, and the arrangement of bones at the joint that allow her to get into the crouched position. So we referred to the picture, we've talked about a crouched position, we've put a connective in there, and we've been specific with flex and hinge joint. It sounds really, really simple, and I know most of you can tell me that when you're looking at that picture, but you just don't write with the right detail with the flex, the hinge joint, and the arrangement of bones of the joint. A second response then, the player needs to be able to move, which is one of the functions of the skeletal system, her skeleton, to achieve this shape. So obviously she's down in a crouched position, for example, which is what the question's looking for, but you get a mark for referring to the example. The player moves her arms to prepare to throw the ball. The bones provide a place for muscle attachment. So obviously if we look at her arms as well as we've looked at her legs in the first point, they're preparing to release the ball. Providing a place for muscle attachment, so when the muscles contract, they pull. Remember, muscles only pull, they don't push the bones, creating flexion at the elbow. Again, being specific, so we've got flexion, extension, flexion at the elbow currently, and the muscles have pulled the bones into that position, and obviously when they release the pass, they go into extension when they transfer the power. So again, to get 3 marks on each, we're looking for really simplistic points connected with a connection, making sure we've applied to the picture, and referring to the correct terminology of hinge joint, muscle attachment, movement, flexion, all keywords that we need to make sure we're talking about when the skeletal system is one of the questions. 3b then, so it's still referring to the same rugby area because it's a B question, it's not gone on to a new area. And again, the rugby player is part of the question. So again, it starts with a statement. White blood cells are produced by the skeletal system. So that's one of the skeletal system's functions. Explain, using an example, which a lot of people missed, why white blood cell production is important to the rugby player, not in general, not any player, the rugby player. So first of all, to get the initial mark, we get white blood cells fight infection. That's your AO1 point. Dead simple, straight, factual. For example, so we're referring to the next part of the question of using an example. During a rugby tackle, a player may receive a cut that causes a risk of infection. Therefore, because we're using a connective for our explain question, white blood cells are needed to destroy the bacteria that entered through the cut. So you see this on a lot of rugby players, particularly eye and ear and nose injuries, blood streaming down their face. They're on a rugby field, there's lots of mud, there's lots of infection out on the field. So the moment they've got a cut, they've got things going into the wound that increases the chance of infection. And that's what the white blood cell's job is, to go to that area and fight that infection. A pretty straightforward question. Most people just didn't respond to it in the right way, and we've talked about this on both papers now. Explain must have a connective. You start with a simplistic point, you explain it, you use that example, and you state its purpose. That's what we've done in this question here. Okay, 4. Django is 16 and trains regularly at an athletics club. Describe using the Carvan formula, the simplified formula, how to calculate his aerobic target zone. So the first thing when we think of the Carvan formula, we're going to go 220 minus age. That's the first thing that should come into your brain. 220, when you're born, your heart beats 220 times per minute, whereas if you age, with every year you take a beat off. It says describe, and it's worth 3 marks. Now describe is not explain. You don't need a connective. It's helpful to write like that in all responses, but you don't need it. So the kind of key points that we need to make in this one is to calculate his maximum heart rate. It's 220, for some reason I've written 222, minus 16. Then calculate 60% of his maximum heart rate to give him the lower of his aerobic target zone. Then 80% of the maximum heart rate to give his aerobic training zone. So we need to remember, in order for this question, we need 60 to 80 equals aerobic. And then we go 80 to 90 is anaerobic. Okay, so that's just going to help us remind ourselves for this question, which leads perfectly into the next question. Most people understood this question, responded well, but they didn't get the second mark. State how the calculation would change when calculating his anaerobic target zone. So we've not got to say just what the anaerobic target zone is, we've got to say how it would change. So the first thing we're going to identify is, rather than the 60 to 80 of the maximum heart rate, we would use 80 to 90% of the maximum heart rate. It's a really weird way to get 2 marks, and it isn't really rocket science, this question. And I can understand why a load of people just talked about the 80 to 90%, but you didn't respond to the bit by what would change. So you had to identify that the process would be the same, but instead of just looking at the 60 to 80, you would this time look at the 80 to the 90 to get the 2 marks for this question. Another graph question. And again, as you can see already, you need to edit your graphs and your figures. You need to be adding to them to break down the question. So this one's looking at Django's heart rate during a typical training session. We've got his heart rate beats per minute up the side, and then we've got time at the bottom. So a bit like what we did for our PEP, we've got your resting heart rate at the bottom. So before exercise, you can clearly see from exercise the way he starts to warm his body up, and then he does his activity. And if we draw the lines down, we're looking for at least half an hour of activity, stable activity. We can then see where clearly he stopped doing activity and he's slowly recovering back to his resting heart rate, although he doesn't quite make it. So, question C then. Using figure 5, the figure above, explain whether Django is training for an endurance or power event. So first of all, we know we've got to respond. Endurance or power is a decision we've got to make. This is worth 4 marks. Explain being a key word again, so I've got to use connectives. So, really, really simple. Look how many words I was able to condense this down to for a 4 marker. It's accurate, it's clear, it's not waffle, which a number of us are great at doing, and it answers the question to getting maximum marks. So the heart rate remains steady, which it has done. It hasn't changed from minute roughly in the 10 minutes to roughly in the 40 minutes. So for 30 minutes it stayed exactly the same. So it's remained steady during the training session, indicating, which is my connective, a consistent workload. So it's indicating whatever he's doing it without change. He's not jumping, he's merely doing his activity consistently. As this is over an extended period of time. Now I could be really specific and put over an extended period of time, for him being 30 minutes. So with that information, if he's working consistently and over an extended period of time, that's almost the definition of endurance. A power is an explosive, short, sharp activity. He has got no short, sharp activities there. It's consistent, it's over a long period of time, and it's steady. So the final mark I'm going to get is for it being suitable for an endurance athlete. So 4 marks, I get 1 for saying it remains steady, I get 1 for saying it's a consistent workload, 1 for over an extended period of time, so not just over 2 or 3 minutes, we've done it obviously for 30 minutes, and finally for making the decision, it's an endurance-based athlete. Again, look back at the question, if I didn't have that connective indicating, I would not have been able to get more than 1 or 2 marks. I have to connect my points. I can't simply write 4 sentences and expect to get 4 marks. They must be connected in an explain question. Question 5 then, going on to the muscular system. It does help if you use the letters and start identifying the muscles that you can see. But again, part of the question response is to do that in a second. Complete them for 5A, the following statements about the labelled muscles in figure 6. So the muscle labelled in A in figure 6 is, so it's looking at the bum, is the gluteus maximus. So the outside, the big muscle, the big part of your muscular butt area. Going on to the second statement for the second mark, when muscle A contracts, so when it contracts, so shortens, it's going to extend the leg at the hip. So it brings the hip, so it extends, increases in the range of that muscle. When it does the opposite of contract, it relaxes, obviously it's going to flex the leg at the hip and bring the leg back towards the body. Linking to the same picture in the same muscle group, state the name of the muscle that works antagonistically with the muscle labelled in A in figure 6. So you know that the two pair, when we look at the gluteus maximus, you know that it extends the leg at the hip while relaxing while it's extending are the hip flexors. So you know the gluteus maximus and hip flexors are a muscle pair just like the bicep and tricep. Still relating to that same question then, we have C, analyse the action of muscle B, which is referring to the arm, in the figure to aid the performance of the runner. Now if we look at muscle B and look at exactly where it's pointing to, it's the inside of the muscle. So the inside of the muscle is always going to be the bicep. The tricep is the bit underneath. If you think of your chicken wings or your bingo wings, when they're flappy, the bits that fall underneath, they're your triceps. And obviously you've got your bicep on the inner circle. So in order to get 4 marks for this, again, look how short and concise we're able to do. The first thing we've got to talk about is performance. We have to say what the muscle is for B and we have to relate it to running. So the first mark we're going to gain is for saying muscle B is the bicep in figure 5. The bicep is contracted, allowing the arm to flex at the elbow. So it's contracted in the picture, so it's enabling the arm to be flexed at the elbow. It's not fully flexed, but it's flexed, it's not extended. It might be moving into an extension phase, but is not currently, it is currently flexed. So it's contracted. So by saying bicep and the word contracted so far, I've got 2 out of 4 marks. Because I'm analysing, I don't need a connective, but because I'm analysing the movement, I have to go on and explain what I mean by that. So this enables the arm to flex at the elbow, which we've said, which enables the runner to pump his arm so he can run faster. How often do you see long distance runners like Mo Farah running with their arms by their side? They have a process, the coordination part. They need to pump their legs and the body faster, so it has a process. That is how it aids performance, and nearly all of us miss that section, the aid in performance. So we have to state what the muscle is, what it's doing, contracting, what does that cause, flexion at the elbow, and then we have to go to the final part of the question, how does that help performance? It pumps the arms so we can run faster. 4 marks written over 3 lines. Final question, a tough one if you didn't or couldn't remember or haven't revised the lever systems, because you wouldn't have a clue how to respond to this question. Analyse the lever system acting at C. So again, we refer back to the picture. So this is the foot, the ball of the foot at the moment, which it's pointing to. So the question in here, we've got a second class lever in action. The second class lever is formed at C, gets us our initial mark out of 4. Again, a tough one for 4, but again, look how much writing we need to access all marks. With the load being the runner's weight. Okay, so the second class lever system, the load being the runner's weight, the whole body weight that runs through the joints. The effort is being provided by the gastrocnemius, the muscle, the calf muscle in the leg. This is where the effort's coming from. So obviously gastrocnemius propels us forward. The joint at the ball of the foot is our fulcrum, and that's the area that we're running across. So that's the fulcrum in action, that's our gastrocnemius, and our whole body weight is our weight. So in order to get all of those key areas, for 4 marks, you simply just must know your lever system, and you're saying how it's been processed in the picture. So a second class lever is formed at C with the load being the runner's weight, the effort is provided by the gastrocnemius, and the joint at the bottom, the ball of the foot, is being the fulcrum. You're literally saying what is occurring in the picture, and you're applying the correct body parts to the correct second class lever system. A difficult one if you don't remember your lever system, an easy one now looking back. If you do remember your lever system, all you had to explain is a second class lever, applying it to our running example. Okay, question 6. Different activities have different fitness requirements. Complete table 1, so it's telling us to write in the table. It's given us 2 ways to earn 2 marks. First, by identifying a component of fitness. So when we think of component of fitness, we go power crab, and then we go down the muscular strength, muscular endurance, cardiovascular endurance, flexibility, somatotype, and speed. Second one, state the advantage of this component for performance. So we've got to relate it to the performer. So the first 2 marks, we just merely need to correctly identify the component of fitness most useful. Not all the components that each athlete needs, they need loads. It's the most useful. You've got to make a decision here. So the 100-metre sprinter, you could have had either speed or power. What's the advantage of having speed and power as a 100-metre sprinter? Is you accelerate quickly, you gain speed, you get up to speed as quickly as possible. That's the point of a 100-metre sprint, because it's over so quickly. You need to gain as much acceleration as quickly as possible. The long-distance rower. One of the key ones here for a long-distance rower is your muscular endurance. That far outweighs your cardiovascular system. So the ability to row, so bringing those legs and arms forward and backwards over and over and over again, far outweighs the cardiovascular system. So the muscular endurance would be your key component of fitness. An advantage to the former, it keeps the row in action for the length of the race without tiring. So having an effective level of muscular endurance allows them to keep rowing for the length of the race. Simple 4 marks. Most people got at least 2, some got 4, some didn't get any just because they purely guessed the wrong components of fitness, so by default couldn't explain the advantage of the performer correctly. The topic area for number 7 then, from number 6, we're looking at key fitness tests for the components that the person would need for each of the sporting events. So it says state a fitness test that the following performance should use to assess their fitness for their sport. Nearly everybody, again, I think only one person got this correct. A long distance swimmer would not benefit from running for 12 minutes. That won't tell them how effective they are at swimming. This may be new to you, and if it is, this is great, we're learning it right away. But the 12-minute Cooper swim test is exactly the same as a 12-minute run test, only you swim continuously up and down for 12 minutes. And like you do with a Cooper run test, you get a metre score of how many metres you've swum, and then you get put into a category. You then go on to a sprint hurdler. Now, a 30-metre sprint test would be great for a sprint hurdler. You could have had the flexibility sit and reach, because obviously you've got to have supple and flexible joints to be able to get over each hurdle. Finally, a high jumper, we're looking at the vertical jump test. It's testing the power in our muscles to jump high. That enables us to jump high in high jump. So they're the only 3 real tests that were acceptable for these answers. Again, they're all tests minus maybe the Cooper swim test that you have done, and being able to identify the correct one for the correct sport is a key. It's not a difficult topic to revise, this one, so make sure you're confident. So, Ray's a long distance cyclist. As part of a PEP, Ray carries out aerobic training regularly. State 2 long-term effects of aerobic training on a cardiorespiratory system. 2 long-term effects. No explain, just state. Dead easy. Increase the size of her heart and decrease her resting heart rate. They're long-term effects. They take a while for those effects to happen to your body. To get the 2 marks, we simply need to write next to the number 1 and number 2, 1 item for each. Question 8II is linking back to 8I. Explain why the 2 long-term effects you've stated in A would be an advantage to Ray in long-distance cycling. It's worth 4 marks, so 2 points for both, where we need a connective as well. So, increased size of heart increases the oxygen delivery as, so our connective, more blood is being pumped per beat. Therefore, more oxygen is available for energy release. So the heart's bigger, it's able to pump more oxygen around our body. Therefore, more oxygen is able to help create energy in the muscles when we're doing exercise. Secondly, linking to our second point of decreased resting heart rate. Decreased resting heart rate gives her a greater heart rate range. So obviously her heart rate is lower, and then she gets to go to a higher heart rate range. So working harder will take longer because she started from a lower place. When exercise, therefore she'll be able to continue to supply sufficient oxygen when she is exercising. So not just supplying oxygen to the body, supplying effective what she needs, sufficient oxygen when she is exercising. 9. Method of training question. Describe the plyometric training. Dead simple. It's worth 2 marks, 2 points to write. Describe. So number 1, it involves jumping from one level to another. We can then link this on. We don't have to write a number 1 and number 2. The muscle lengthens on landing and then quickly contracts and shortens. Dead simple. We explain the type of activity we do at plyometric training, and you've kind of given the reason why. So the muscle lengthening on landing and quickly contracting and shortening. So that's basically 2 marks, 2 points, no connectives needed. Describe just means explain what it is, say what it does. That's all it's asking for 2 simple marks. Give an example of a sports performer who has used plyometric training. It's jumping. So again, we've looked at this option earlier. A high jumper, somebody who needs to jump, where their muscles lengthen on landing and quickly contract and shorten. And that's what we're looking for that. So a simple example, like a high jumper, for 1 mark. Nothing to say why, just an example on this question. State 1 advantage and 1 disadvantage then of plyometric training. If you didn't know plyometric training, this question was a bit of a loss for you because you lost so many marks. But even if you're not sure, have an absolute guess. Even if it's a randomly guessed answer that's correct, the examiner can only positively mark. They can't take away marks because you've guessed incorrectly. They can only look to find the correct responses. So 1 advantage, you don't need much equipment. Sometimes it's just a skipping rope, sometimes it's a box. Basically you're jumping, so you don't need a lot of equipment. Second one, you can become injured if intensity is too great. So you're jumping too high or too repetitively, you can become injured. It's only worth 2 marks, it's not worth 2 sentences. Something dead simple, 3 words for the first mark, a few more for the second mark. It's not difficult, but if you're not confident on what plyometric training is, you wouldn't say what it is, you wouldn't give a good example, and you wouldn't be able to tell me an advantage and disadvantage for that method of training. Okay, performance enhancing drugs. Diuretics are a banned performance enhancing drug. State, not explain, state 2 reasons why an athlete might take diuretics, even though they're obviously banned. So reason 1, they mask the presence of another drug. We don't say why they might take it, they're just saying the benefit of taking that drug. So we wouldn't say they're pressured by a coach or anything like that. We're just listing they mask the presence of another drug. And for the second reason, they give rapid weight loss. So you can make the right weight for an activity like a boxing match or a judo match for an example. So basically 2 simplistic reasons what diuretics are. If you couldn't remember what they were, then again you wouldn't be able to respond to that question. And it's a nice easy question because it's asking you to state rather than explain. I'm not quite sure on this question how anybody got it wrong, because when we look back through it does stick out. Exam pressure can definitely make us do silly things. So by getting into a good process of identifying the key parts of the question and highlighting on the graph, the figure, the table, the information in front of us, we can break down the question to make sure we don't make silly mistakes. So from the Olympics doping cases by sport from 1968 to 2010, it's got the number of doping cases reported in the first column and the Olympic doping cases by sport in the second column. In total, 127 cases were reported. We've got weightlifting at the top with 36 and skiing, basketball, boxing, canoeing and sailing down the bottom with 1. So we come to the first question then. Using the activity, identify the activity with the greatest number of reported doping cases. I don't think you can get a simpler question on this test. It's worth 1 mark. The answer is only going to be with 36 weightlifting. Again, if you got this question wrong, which some people did, you were then not able to access the second mark because it says state the most likely. So it doesn't mean all the drugs that a weightlifter would take, it means what's the one they're most likely. So what most likely type of performance enhancing drug taken by the performing the activity you've just identified in A, so weightlifting. So weightlifters would look at anabolic steroids, so to be able to train longer and harder, lift heavier weights, gain more muscle mass and be able to lift and perform at a greater intensity is the only answer. You're right, a weightlifter would use things, or potentially would use things, like diuretic to get rid of the other drugs, such as anabolic steroids, but they're more likely to benefit from taking anabolic steroids. Anabolic steroids is the most likely type of drug that they would look to take. You can see the exam board are obsessed with data and using graphs and charts and things like that. So with figure 8, continuing the same theme when we're looking at Olympic Games, this breaks down from the 1968 to 2008, the number of doping tests carried out in the Summer and Winter Games. It's got the Summer Games at the top and the Winter Games at the bottom. When we look at the first question, it's asking us to analyse the data in figure 8 to determine A, the trend in the number of tests administered in the Olympic Games. The trend's easy. In 1968, in the Mexico Olympic Games, you can see there were 667 cases. It finished in Beijing in 2008 with 4,770. You're right, it doesn't go up neatly, it doesn't go up by a certain amount, but it goes from 667 and it goes all the way up to 47, with most years increasing. So you can see the trend there. So what, not the exact pattern, but roughly what's occurring is it's increasing. It's exactly the same when we look at the Winter Games, from 86 to 1,200, and it's slowly got to a higher point. At times it's jumped ahead, but it's slowly gone all the way from 86 towards the 1,000 scale. So the only answer for us with the first part is it's an increased number of the tests is the only trend pattern we should realistically be putting. A difference in testing data between the Summer and Winter Games. So we can look at a really simplistic way of look at how many were carried out in the summer and look at how many were carried out in the winter. So one of the biggest differences, more tests were just by volume carried out, or not more cases were recorded, either or, both accepted answers in the Summer Games compared to the Winter Games. Again, it's looking for a distance in the testing data, and it's telling you what between the summer and the winter. So you're looking at things that are different, not things that are the same. Things that are the same, they both increase. The number that they increase by, as in there's more in one Summer Games compared to the Winter Games, is the main difference. Simplistic, when you look back at it now, a number of us unfortunately dropped some marks here. Nearly there. Question 12. Warming up and checking equipment and facilities before use helps reduce injury in sport. State 2 other ways. So we've got checking equipment and warming up. And loads of people read checking equipment as making sure the equipment was correct, and it's not. It's a separate point. So making sure your ski's not broken, making sure your boots are correct, making sure you haven't got a rip in your salopettes to make sure we're not getting cold. Are checking equipment. So state 2 other ways of reducing injury in adventurous activities such as skiing and snowboarding. So wearing protective clothing, so making sure you've got salopettes, a ski jacket on, making sure we've got the right boots on. Even a separate point could be wearing a helmet, so an additional level of protection to make sure that if we fall and bash our head, we're not going to have concussion. The second one is follow the rules of activity. So making sure we're using the lifts correctly, making sure we're not skiing down a slope that's too high for us. So there's a ski code of practice. Again, in football, making sure we're following the rules correctly if we're looking at a different sport would be an appropriate way of reducing injury, so that we're not injuring other players and injuring ourselves, tackling behind, etc., etc. So following the rules of activity will help reduce injury, and so will wearing protective clothing. Linking to that same topic area then, we have warming up, the 3 main phases. Loads of us just couldn't quite remember it. You could see it was at the tip of your tongue. When it came to writing it, most of us were in the 2 or 1 bracket here. You do a pulse raiser Okay, we're not warming up, it's already identified in the question. You're raising your heart rate from a stable resting heart rate zone to a working aerobic or anaerobic threshold zone. We then move on to stretching, nearly everybody got that point. And then finally, a skill-based activity, a more intense activity using skills needed in the coming up activity. So a simple sharp passing drill before you go into a football match, 3-on-2 defending, etc., etc. So you needed to be able to describe all three. What you then needed to do, and a load of people for some reason messed this around and you got some benefit of the doubt marks here, is the first one is a pulse raiser. So an example of the first one is a game of tag. The second one is stretching. You need to be really specific. Give them an example of the stretch that you would carry out. So for football, it'd be something like a hamstring stretch, or definitely for skiing too. Number 3, sprint and receive the ball and then shooting. So we're preparing for a game. So we're looking at replicating the game activities into a drill. So sprint and receive the ball and shooting would be an example of a game activity before you go into the actual exercise or competition. Question 13, one of the 2 9 markers, mostly identified correctly. And not bad of the 2 9 markers. However, it was clear that some people didn't understand what the difference between the 3 are, and the writing style will let most of you down. So you could have accessed more marks from your knowledge, but your writing style kind of prevented that. So evaluate what's good and what's bad. Evaluate your performance in these mocks. What have you done well? What things do you need to look at? So plus and minus. The relevance of the different muscle fibre types for a 5,000 metre runner. So in our plan, we've got the 3 muscle types, type 1, type 2A and type X. What do we need most of the body as a 5,000 metre runner? We need mostly type 1, some type 2A and the least amount of 2X. On the pluses, what's the benefit of having them? So type 1, slow to fatigue, contracts for long periods. Type 2A, more force than type 1, fairly resistant to fatigue. And then finally type 2X, the most powerful contraction, great for short sprints. What's the negative effects of these then? So type 1, it's slow by definition, it's slow by nature. Obviously you can't run at a high speed for long periods of time with that. Type 2A won't last the 5,000 metres, so it enables us to run faster, but it won't last the length of the race. And finally, type 2X, it's quick to fatigue, lasts a really short period of time, and that's not suitable for a 5,000 metre runner. So at the bottom then, we look at a 5,000 metre runner, and we look at when we might need each type in. So obviously type 1A, we're looking at, type 1, a 400 would be for most of the race. When we look at type 2A, we've got a 400 metres, so we can look at overtaking, catching up from the back and getting to the front, ready to prepare for your final sprint at the end. And then finally, type 2X, the most powerful one, would be a fast break, the final sprint, the start when you're trying to get ahead and not get right at the very back. You only use it for a short period of time. So a 5,000 metre runner would need all 3 types, but you need to identify what they need and for the reasons. So an AO1, AO2, AO3 response then. So type 1 is a slow twitch muscle fibre. So we get the identification mark for slow twitch, which are slow to fatigue, what they do. So we've said what it is and what they do. So those in the legs would be able to continue to contract to allow the runner to continue to run throughout the 5,000 without fatiguing. So we've gone on to explain fully what the benefit of having the slow twitch fibre. In order to get an AO3, the runner would benefit from most of his muscles being slow twitch. Again, I could extend that further to say that would help him to run, as typically a 5,000 metre run is over a long period of time, and the other 2 types of muscle contraction wouldn't enable him to run at the same sustained pace over a long period of time. So what we're looking for is the AO1, AO2, AO3 mini paragraphs. So using the plan, 3 to 4 paragraphs would put us in the 7 to 9 group. Like with the last 9 marker, like the next 9 marker, it's so important to get that plan done. It's simplistic, it doesn't take long, it breaks down the question, and we make sure that we're fully responding to the question correctly. A really simple question, which a lot of people got wrong because they just taught too generally.